In the frozen silence of northern Europe, where icy winds sweep across endless forests, a secret was being prepared, one that would shake the very foundations of NATO. This was not a story of massive fleets, gigantic budgets, or decades of military dominance. This was the story of a small nation, Sweden, and its fighter jet, the Gripen E, a machine that dared to humiliate the giants. NATO believed it had the skies under complete control, with American F-35s and F-22 Raptors leading the alliance, and with Europe's Typhoons and Rafales ready to defend the continent. The idea of a smaller, cheaper fighter humiliating this vast alliance sounded impossible, laughable even. But the world was about to witness something that would defy logic. The Gripen E, nicknamed the thinking fighter, wasn't built with arrogance. It wasn't about brute force or trillion-dollar budgets. Instead, it was designed like a predator in the shadows, fast, smart, and adaptive. It carried cutting-edge electronic warfare systems, data fusion technology, and the power to fight not just in the air, but in the invisible world of electronic signals. The mystery began during NATO's secretive war games, exercises never meant for public eyes. Inside these simulations, the Gripen E went against some of the West's most powerful aircraft, and to the shock of many, it didn't just survive, it dominated. F-35s that were supposed to remain invisible suddenly found themselves locked on radar screens. Eurofighter Typhoons, celebrated for their agility, were consistently outmaneuvered. Even the F-22 Raptor, the symbol of American air superiority, was not immune to Gripen's tricks. The secret lay not in raw speed or stealth, but in brains. Gripen E's electronic warfare suite could jam, confuse, and blind its opponents. Its data link allowed it to act as part of a swarm, sharing every piece of information instantly with other aircraft, drones, and ground stations. While other jets fought as individuals, Gripen fought as part of an intelligent network, like a wolf leading a pack. What NATO didn't expect was how far Sweden had pushed the concept of adaptability. Gripen could be reprogrammed within hours. If a new radar threat appeared, engineers could rewrite its code the same day. No other jet in the world could transform itself this quickly. NATO's expensive fighters, burdened with bureaucracy and billions in development costs, simply couldn't keep up. But the real humiliation came when the Gripen E was pitted against overwhelming numbers. During one scenario, 6 Gripens went up against a combined NATO strike package of 20 aircraft. Statistically, the Swedes should have been annihilated. Instead, they shredded the opposition. NATO pilots reported being digitally ambushed. Their radars showed false targets, their communication channels filled with ghost signals, and their missiles lost lock in mid-air. It was as if an invisible hand had taken over the battlefield. When the exercise ended, silence filled the NATO briefing rooms. Generals who had once dismissed the Gripen as a budget toy were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sweden had created a fighter jet that could challenge the most powerful air forces in the world and win. But worse than losing was the humiliation. The fact that a nation with a fraction of NATO's resources had managed to turn technology, strategy, and cunning into a weapon more devastating than raw firepower. Whispers began to spread. Was this just the beginning? Could the Gripen E destabilize the balance of air power across Europe? If Sweden could do this, what did it mean for NATO's future dominance in the skies? What secrets still hid inside this mysterious aircraft? No one in the room wanted to admit it, but the fear was real. And just when NATO thought it had seen everything, another revelation emerged, one that would take this humiliation to an entirely new level. But the true shock had only just begun. NATO generals believed they had seen the full potential of the Gripen E during the first simulations, but Sweden had deliberately held something back. In the second phase of the war games, the Gripen revealed capabilities that even seasoned analysts struggled to explain. This time, the Swedish jets entered the battlefield in complete silence. No active radar, no visible electronic signature, as if they had vanished into the cold northern skies. NATO pilots scrambled to detect them, but every attempt ended in failure. Then, without warning, the Gripens reappeared, not on radar screens, but behind enemy formations, already in attack positions. It was as though they had bent the very laws of detection. The explanation stunned the observers. Gripen's advanced sensor fusion and electronic warfare systems allowed it to turn enemy radars into weapons against themselves. NATO's most sophisticated aircraft were blinded, their targeting systems corrupted. Some pilots even reported false radar contacts, phantom Gripens multiplying across their displays, sowing confusion and panic in the cockpit. By the time they realized what had happened, the Swedish fighters had already destroyed their targets. For NATO, this was more than just a tactical loss. It was humiliation on a global stage. Billions spent on stealth programs and next-generation fighters meant nothing against an aircraft designed with cunning rather than brute force. Sweden had not only defended its skies, it had embarrassed the giants. Whispers began circulating that Gripen's power went beyond electronic warfare. Some claimed it had a cyber integration module capable of hacking into enemy systems mid-air, manipulating software inside hostile aircraft and missiles. If true, it meant Sweden had created not just a jet, but a flying hacker, an airborne predator capable of turning advanced technology into useless metal. What terrified NATO most was the thought of Gripen being exported. If smaller nations gained access to this level of technology, the balance of global air power could collapse overnight. Countries once dependent on the West's air dominance could suddenly stand equal or even superior. Contracts worth hundreds of billions could vanish, and with them, NATO's monopoly on the skies. But Sweden remained silent. Officials neither confirmed nor denied the rumors. Engineers offered no explanations, and pilots refused to speak in detail. The mystery deepened, and with it, the fear. Some argued that the Gripen E had shown only a fraction of its abilities during the war games, a teaser of what it could truly unleash in real combat. Others believed that Sweden deliberately humiliated NATO as a warning, proof that even the most powerful alliances could be outsmarted. Behind closed doors, NATO officials classified the incident at the highest level. Publicly, nothing was acknowledged, yet those who were there knew the truth. They had seen the humiliation unfold with their own eyes. They had watched entire strike packages collapse under the pressure of a jet built by a nation they once considered too small to matter. For the pilots who faced Gripen, the memory was haunting. They described it as a ghost, silent, unpredictable, and always one step ahead. One American pilot whispered in frustration, "You can't fight what you can't even see." Another called it a nightmare in the sky. And so, the legend of the Gripen E grew. A jet that humiliated NATO not with size, but with intelligence. A machine that proved the future of air combat belonged not to those with the deepest pockets, but to those who mastered the invisible battlefield. The world may never know the full truth of what happened in those secret war games. But one fact is undeniable. NATO's skies are no longer untouchable. Somewhere, high above the forests of Sweden, a Gripen E waits, silent, watchful, and ready to remind the world once again that even the most powerful can be humiliated. The echoes of NATO's humiliation had barely faded when new whispers began to surface. Intelligence leaks suggested that the Gripen E had already entered a phase that even NATO's most advanced war planners had not anticipated. This was no longer just about electronic warfare or cyber tricks. This was about rewriting the very concept of how wars would be fought in the skies. According to classified reports, Sweden had secretly begun integrating the Gripen E into a network of autonomous drones. These drones weren't ordinary unmanned systems. They were extensions of the jet itself, controlled through encrypted links that could not be jammed. In effect, one Gripen pilot could command an entire swarm. Where NATO needed dozens of aircraft, Sweden needed only one and its robotic pack. It was a terrifying vision. A lone Gripen entering hostile skies, followed by an invisible army that could overwhelm defenses without warning. But the true revelation came when these drones demonstrated a capability NATO had long feared: independent decision-making. The swarm could split, surround, and even sacrifice units to protect the Gripen. Enemy radars became saturated. Missile defenses were drowned in false targets, and by the time the real Gripen appeared, the battle was already lost. NATO simulations confirmed what no one wanted to believe. Even their strongest fleets could be dismantled by a single Swedish formation. The humiliation deepened when satellite images revealed another shocking truth. Gripen E did not require massive NATO-style bases. It could take off from short runways, frozen roads, or even remote highways deep inside forests. While NATO fighters sat exposed on sprawling airfields, Gripens could scatter like shadows across the wilderness. In any real war, NATO would struggle to even find them, let alone destroy them. This adaptability sent shivers through defense ministries worldwide. A jet that could hide anywhere, control drones like a hive, and bend the battlefield with electronic warfare was more than just a fighter. It was a revolution. And the cost? A fraction of what NATO spent on its stealth projects. The humiliation was no longer limited to military pride. It was financial. Trillions wasted, while Sweden quietly built the future with precision and efficiency. Some within NATO began to suspect a darker possibility. Was Sweden working alone, or had Gripen's technology secretly surpassed even what was shown in exercises? Rumors whispered of hidden modules, systems that could directly infiltrate satellites, blind surveillance networks, or even shut down enemy power grids mid-conflict. The Gripen was no longer just a plane. It was becoming a weapon of global disruption. NATO's leadership was trapped. To admit defeat publicly would shatter their credibility. To ignore the Gripen's rise would be reckless, and to challenge Sweden directly would risk exposing more humiliations. Behind closed doors, generals debated new strategies. Some argued for cooperation, bringing Sweden deeper into NATO to contain the secret. Others feared this would only reveal more of NATO's vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, Sweden stayed silent, watching, calculating, never revealing its full hand. The silence itself became a weapon, feeding NATO's paranoia. How much more could the Gripen E do? What was still hidden inside its systems? Could even America's most secret stealth projects survive against it? No one knew, and that uncertainty was as devastating as any missile. As the legend of Gripen spread, nations began to line up for its purchase. The world had witnessed NATO's embarrassment, even if details remained classified. Countries that had once relied on Western dominance now saw a new option, a fighter jet that humiliated giants, and each new customer meant NATO's monopoly weakened further. The Gripen E had done more than humiliate NATO. It had shifted the balance of power, shattered illusions, and planted a fear that would haunt the alliance for years. What began as a mysterious war game had grown into a shadow war for influence, technology, and survival. Some say this is only the beginning, that Gripen's next evolution is already in testing, something even more unpredictable, more intelligent, and more unstoppable. A machine not bound by today's rules of combat, but one that will define tomorrow's. And if that is true, then NATO's greatest humiliation is yet to come. Because in the skies above Europe, somewhere beyond the clouds, the Gripen E waits, not just as a fighter, but as a warning. The warning that no alliance, no matter how powerful, is untouchable.